just so everyone is aware. And then at the conclusion of the NCHI Summit, you will receive the information from the presentation. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the chat box throughout, and then you can send me questions in a direct message, as presenters may not be able to see them with their screen sharing component on. We will try to reserve 10 minutes or more at the end of the session to address all questions. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to JW and Leslie to get us kicked off and introduce themselves.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. I'm JW Lazzari, Director of Financial Assistance at Western Nevada College, and I'm thrilled to be here with my colleague and friend, Leslie Gia, Financial Aid Director at Truckee Meadows Community College. So welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share going. So you should be able to see my screen now. Thanks for coming to Debunking Financial Aid Awarding Myths and Exploring Financial Aid Packaging Philosophies. We're thrilled to see you here. We had a great turnout in our first session, and we're happy to see another batch of people here. We're curious about where everybody works. So if you can put in the chat where you work and what your role is at your institution, we'd love to see if we have any financial aid folks out there, or what kind of folks are in the audience. So while you're doing that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, who will talk about our goals for today.
Right. Thank you, JW. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our session, and we hope that you guys are having a wonderful time at the summit. Just wanted to give you guys a quick outline of what we're going to be discussing today in our presentation. JW is going to start off our presentation discussing about the common financial aid myths we hear in our offices. We will talk about the literature surrounding on financial aid, student and literature on the community colleges. And then we're going to dive deep into our financial aid packaging philosophy, what that means for each of us at our institution, and what efforts are we doing to help our students engage and be successful.
Great, thanks, Leslie. So it looks like we have a variety of folks from advising and some financial aid folks from some outreach centers. So I'm so glad that you were all here. We are going to start with a quiz, and this is just for fun, just to kind of gauge your financial aid knowledge. So I'm going to be launching a poll, and take a few minutes to answer the questions, and then we're going to go over some of these myths and things that we hear in our office often to clarify any things that maybe you're unsure of. All right, looks like some answers are starting to come in. All right, I'll give you another 30 seconds or so to wrap that up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So sorry if you weren't able to finish. Let me share the results. So you should be able to see the results now, but let's just walk through these. We were almost at 100% on number one. This is always kind of a fun game. Do we know what the acronym stands for? And as we're going through this presentation, if we're using acronyms that you're unsure about, put that in the chat so we can make sure to clarify as we go. But the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. So I was glad to see most of you got that. That's really the starting point for students and families when they're applying for aid. Let's move on to number two. Parents and family are the primary source to help students pay for school. Fact or myth? Look like a lot of us were on the myth train for that one. But that is in fact a fact. The parents and family are the primary source to help students pay for school. And then there's aid programs available to help supplement or to help the student meet their financial needs. So that one is a fact. So good job for 4 of you. The FAFSA is hard. Well, depends, I guess, on who you're talking to, if that's a fact or a myth. But really what has happened over the last 2 years is the FAFSA continues to get easier. It is intimidating. The whole idea of completing a FAFSA is intimidating for our students, whether they're straight out of high school or they're returning to school. It's intimidating for parents, but it keeps getting easier through the implementation of things like the IRS data retrieval tool and the skip logic that the Department of Education has created. So students and families are only answering questions that are applicable to their situation. And in the future, there's legislation to make the FAFSA supposedly even easier with less questions. So we're hoping that continues to improve and streamline the process. The FAFSA is only used for federal aid, number 4. That is a myth, so great job. The FAFSA is used by financial aid offices for a variety of different aid programs, whether they're state programs or institutional programs. We use data elements from the FAFSA to help us determine what a student might qualify for. So great job on that. Most students don't qualify for the Pell Grant. Well, we don't really know if a student qualifies for the Pell Grant or not until we actually have a FAFSA on the student. So students might think they won't qualify based on their parents' income situation or their family size, but until a student actually completes the FAFSA, we're not really sure. So it's important for students to complete the FAFSA regardless. Let's move on to number 6. My parents make too much money to qualify for aid. So yeah, we hear this all the time at our front desk or in the counseling office or out at the high schools. Oh, I'm not going to qualify for anything. But students don't really know that until they've actually applied. So we really want students to make sure that they're submitting the application so we can determine what they're eligible for. And as we're going to talk about in this presentation, we're trying to be creative to hit students from a variety of income levels. Okay, number 7. I'm under 24, but considered independent because I'm caring for a child. Yeah, that one can get kind of tricky because it does depend. And while it might sound like, yeah, that's a logical rationale and that meets federal requirements, it might depend. And oftentimes financial aid administrators have to ask follow-up questions to see if that's really the case. Because the student, if they're under 24, they have to be supporting that child more than 50%. So financial aid folks have to have those hard conversations and ask students and families, what is their situation to help best advise them on how to complete their FAFSA or their verification or any other financial aid documents. The FAFSA has a deadline. Yeah, well, it does have a deadline, but it has a huge application window, and that's really more the important point. The FAFSA opens October 1st every year, and then it goes all the way till June 30th of the actual award year. So for example, students applying for the 21-22 award year, they could start completing their FAFSA on October 1st, 2020. And they really can do it at any point during the award year, which would end June 30th, 2022. However, with that being said, it's important for students and families to understand the dates and deadlines that are applicable to their school. because schools will have their own priority funding deadlines. They might have a financial aid census date. There's a variety of dates that the student will need to become familiar with. But we get that question all the time. What's the FAFSA deadline? And it's not as easy as saying a date. It depends on where we're at in the award year and so forth. Number 9, well, look at that, 100%. I can't complete a FAFSA if my parents don't have a social security number. Yeah, that is definitely a myth. If a student has a social security number, they can complete a FAFSA. It doesn't matter what the parent's immigration status is. So we want students with socials, even if they're DACA, they can complete a FAFSA. The EFC, the expected family contribution, is the amount the student should be prepared to pay. So we had some people with a fact there and some with a myth. The EFC is not the amount that a student or family should be prepared to pay to go to school. It's really an index number that helps the school determine what types of aid programs the student is eligible for. So we're going to talk more about the EFC here in a few slides. So great job. It looks like we have some folks who have some solid financial aid knowledge in the audience today. And we're hopeful that what we have prepared will help increase that knowledge. So I'm going to hand it over to Leslie to talk about some of the research.
Great, thank you, JW. So for the sake of our presentation, I am just going to be briefly talking about Princeton's policy of eliminating student loans. I do want to let everyone know that there are several different financial aid packaging philosophies, and how a college chooses to award and package their students will be different and unique, based on the student's needs and maybe what are even the goals for the college. But for the sake of our presentation, I wanted to kind of just highlight what this is about, because this is something that TMCC and WNC really strives for. So in a 2010 research study, researchers reviewed different financial aid packaging philosophies. But ultimately, with Princeton's policy, what they have learned that when the university decided to replace student loans in financial aid packages and replace them with institutional grants or scholarships, they saw that in terms of student performance, there were fewer students who were stopping out, and they did also see an increase in student graduation probabilities. So just want you guys to keep in mind that this is, as we go on to the presentation, this is the framework of, why we think this philosophy works best for TMCC and WNC. So other literature on student loans. Right now, the current federal student loan borrowing policy allows part-time students who are enrolled at the community college to borrow the same amount that a student could borrow at a four-year university if they were enrolled full-time. This is obviously an policy implication, because originally when this policy was created, this was a policy geared towards students who were pursuing a four-year bachelor's degree. But since community colleges also participate in the federal student aid program, we also have to adhere to the same rules, just as other colleges who are offering aid at the universities. So this is what we're seeing is a consequence of this policy. Other research shows that students of color are more likely to borrow student loans to just help them pay for their college expenses. And students of color, particularly African-American students, are at greater risk of accumulating debt and are more likely to default. And this is still true today. A lot of the research still continues to point that African-American students are still our most vulnerable students in terms of financial aid and borrowing student loans and defaulting. And then I do want to point out that there is not a lot of research on student loan borrowing at the community colleges. So highlighting these two research is even more important. But I also want to point out that while this research may be old and outdated, these are still things that our community colleges still continue to experience. So in the 2013 study, they found that part-time community college students, they progress slower with completing college, and they also leave college with a larger amount of student loan debt. And then in another research study, they actually interviewed financial aid counselors at the community colleges. And this is what one financial aid counselor had to say. Community colleges have very limited control to prevent students from over-borrowing, but the schools are then held liable for their cohort default rates. Again, these research may be outdated, but these are still things we see today. So why are cohort default rates so important? Well, when you are participating in the Title IV federal student aid program, there's an expectation that the college is also making efforts to control and maintain their default rates. And if a college can't control or maintain their default rate, what you can see is our sanctions. So these are some of the few sanctions that you can see that can happen for a college. Federal fines, program reviews. That's when the Department of Education decides to conduct an audit at a school. And then the worst sanction ever could be suspension of participating in the Title IV aid program. So that means depending on the default rate of a college, they might not be able to offer federal student loans, or they might not be able to offer the federal Pell Grant. And we know that, for a lot of colleges, that, offering federal aid is what keeps our doors open to our students and help them succeed. So again, very important things that the financial aid offices and the college have to keep an eye on with our default rates.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So with that, we thought we'd jump to the trends for TMCC and WNC of how our CDR, our cohort default rates, have been looking over the last few years. And Leslie mentioned some of those sanctions. So if you look at the 2014, WNC's in blue, TMCC's in orange. WNC had a 27.4 CDR, and that is high. In general, when you hit a 30, there's all sorts of sanctions that come your way. But with that high CDR, what it really triggered for the college was, well, we had to relook at our approach to student loans, and we had to, so we started doing that. But it triggered in the long run for the Department of Education to come out and do a program review and make sure our financial aid office was operating how it's supposed to, and the institution was. So all in all, our program review came out okay, but that high number triggered a thorough investigation to make sure that we were, implementing Title IV programs appropriately. So we've been working hard to try to bring that CDR down, and you can see TMCC's done a great job. Their most recent official rate from 2017 CDR is 12.5, which was below the national average for two-year public. So great job to TMCC and all of the programs that they have implemented. So the goal is to continue to bring this down as much as possible. And we're going to talk about some of the strategies that we have in place to help do that, because it's important for the school to keep that CDR under control, because that would impact lots of students if we didn't. Some of the challenges with CDRs, especially for schools like WNC, which is a small school, we have small numbers. So one student in default can really bump our number up. So we're doing our best to reach as many students as possible. So let's jump to the next slide. So what does all this mean? We've kind of talked about some packaging philosophies from Princeton, some things about student loans, and then the CDR, which has implications for the school. So what does the financial aid office do with that information, and how do we help students meet their financial needs when they can borrow? But how do we use our other programs how do we leverage those programs to help students? So to do that, we thought we'd kind of start at the beginning. I see we have some financial aid folks in the crowd, so you know this process, and we have some folks from other offices. You might be somewhat familiar with it. We're just going to kind of walk through it so we're all on the same page and we set the groundwork. Each student is going to have what's called a cost of attendance, and that's really an estimate of the student's tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, transportation, personal miscellaneous expenses. So the cost of attendance is going to be unique to the student based on their enrollment level, potentially based on their housing situation, and cost of attendances are unique to institutions. So while TMCC and WNC are very similar, we're both community colleges, we have the same registration fees, our costs of attendance are different because we are in different communities and we serve different students. So we have different housing costs, we have different transportation costs, et cetera. So we're going to use that cost of attendance. We're going to start with that. And then we're going to look at the student's expected family contribution, or the EFC. So again, the EFC is not the amount the student or family should be prepared to pay to go to school, which we hear that all the time out in the high schools. We'll be doing well, pre-COVID, when we were out in the high schools, students would get their confirmation page and they'd say, what is this EFC number? And that's what I have to pay. That's not what it is. It's really an index number, and that's confusing for families to understand, but it's an index number. There's a complex federal formula that's used to calculate it. That's for a different presentation, so we won't talk about that today, but we use that EFC to determine what type of aid programs the student is eligible for. So we then take the cost of attendance, we subtract the EFC to determine the student's financial need. Many of the programs that we administer are need-based programs, meaning the student needs to have financial need. That financial need number is the amount that a school could award to a student through need-based federal, state, and institutional aid programs. So that's a really important starting point to understanding how do we help our financial aid applicants fulfill that financial need, okay? So at TMCC and WNC, we've taken the approach that we want to make a comprehensive award package for students through all of the aid programs that are free money. So grants, scholarships, and then through programs that are where the student has to earn it, like work study programs. And we only offer those programs to a student up front. There's obviously a number of other eligibility requirements that have to be checked for each program, but we try to create a comprehensive financial aid offer for the student. So you can see a snippet. This is from one of the TMCC financial aid offer letters, where they've awarded a federal aid program, a state aid program, a TMCC access aid program. There's some state scholarships in there, and then there was potentially a work study award at one point. So it's a comprehensive package to help the student meet their financial need. Once we've done that, we know that students will still have unmet need. And that is where the challenge comes into play. And that is where we see students still trying to borrow to help pay for that room and board or those outside expenses. So our goal as financial aid administrators is to really reduce that unmet need as much as possible through creative awarding and to help students who do borrow smartly. So we're going to launch another poll, and this one is just 2 questions, so don't fear. We'd like to see what you think TMCC's unmet need is and WNC's unmet need is on average for students. So once we've awarded all of those different programs we've just talked about, we've made comprehensive aid packages, how much need does a student still have? Okay, looks like some votes are coming in. Give it just another few seconds. All right, any last voters? Okay, I'll end the poll. Let me share the results. So interesting, we have very different results from our last session. At TMCC, the average unmet need is actually $10,138. So even after we've done as much as we can, there's still a significant amount of need to meet. And at WNC, it's not far behind at $10,009. So we know that students have financial needs. So what's the how do we help those students? That's really the question. What do we do to help students reduce their financial need without turning directly to student loans? And one of the ways that we can do that is through how we use our access aid or our institutional aid. So for those of you not familiar with what access aid is, you can dig into the weeds in the Board of Regents policy. I think it's, or the Board of Regents handbook, sorry, Title 4, Section 8. And there's all sorts of criteria there, but essentially access dollars come from student registration fees. So 10% of every student registration fee is funneled into what's called a fee generated access account. And that the financial aid office or the institution can develop programs, financial aid programs. 100% of those funds have to be spent on financial aid programs to help students in a variety of ways. So we have some flexibility with these funds to reach a number of different students. 80% of those fee generated access funds do have to go to students with financial need. So that's why we kind of wanted to cover that before. So you kind of understood what is financial need and where do we get that number from. So 80% of those dollars do have to go to students with financial need, and 20% can go to students without financial need. If you work at a university, the percentage is higher for each registration fee. I think it's 15%, but at the community colleges, it's 10%. So we just listed on the screen some of our different award programs that are funded through fee generated access aid. So Leslie, do you want to talk about yours?
Yeah, so as JW had mentioned is, one way what we're doing with these access dollars is which is why it's so important to complete a FAFSA, right? Because the FAFSA is what we really use to not just determine federal aid, but also aid such as access aid. But this is one way we're using to help meet the unmet need that students have. But we award essentially access aid to several different groups of students. So as long as students are enrolled in 6 credits or above, they've completed a FAFSA, they're meeting satisfactory academic progress, they can qualify for some of these, one of these grants or some. So we have general TMCC need grants. We have incentive grants targeted specifically for students in our GRS cohort, but under incentive grants, we award freshman incentive grants, incentive grants for continuing students, and graduation incentive grants. And the purpose of why the incentive grants were created was it was in response to Complete College America. They had recommended that this was a best practice to provide targeted financial assistance to students who are predicted to be successful. So incentive grants, the awards for these students are generally higher than the standard amount, but students who are enrolled in 12 credits will receive a certain amount in incentive grants, and same for students who are enrolled in 15 or more. We also have grants awarded to our Summer Bridge students who participate in our Summer Bridge program. And these are our students who are low income, first generation students just graduating from high school and going to TMCC for the first time. We also have the Adelante grant that targets our DACA and undocumented students. And then we also use our access aid to award students work study. So we try to use our access aid and spread these dollars as best as we can to reach as many students who need these dollars.
Great, thanks, Leslie. So similar approaches at WNC. We have a WNC award and WNC non-need award that we give to a variety of students who are in 6 credits or more and meeting the satisfactory academic progress requirements. Where we've tried to get creative is with our Wildcat Award. The Wildcat Award, we have created an awarding philosophy around that award that is to go to students who are just outside of the Pell Grant range. So students who don't qualify for potentially federal grants. So they might have an EFC of like 5,700 or higher, but they still demonstrate financial need. And we know these students are really our students that are kind of on the bubble, students who are more likely to go part-time, who are more likely to have to work more hours, and they're not qualifying for federal aid, and they don't necessarily have savings or a financial support system at home that can help them pay. So we're trying to help those students who are on the bubble with those low EFCs, but it's not low enough to get any help from the federal government. We give them $1,000 each semester to try to help bridge that gap, to help keep them enrolled, to help them enroll in more credits if necessary. I mean, that's where we've tried to really get creative and help students that we weren't always helping before. We were always targeting students with the lowest EFCs, the most financial need, where in fact, those students are getting all sorts of aid from federal government sources, state government, other, need-based awards through the foundation. So we were trying to hit some students kind of in the middle range, those working students that need additional help. We also help a Latino cohort. We have a NFA Wildcat Award, which is for students who are undocumented or DACA students. And then we also have a Western Student Employment Program, which is a work-study program. So we do our best to get as creative as possible to help increase access and hopefully impact success. So we want to show you some of our numbers. So Leslie's going to share from TMCC.
So you can see that with our data, and this is from 1920 data, that really when we can offer aid to students, what we see now is that more students have the time and can actually enroll in more credits. And this makes sense because now our students are not worried about picking up a second job or saving up for additional funds just so they can be in, they can enroll in more courses. So this just shows you that our access aid is effective and it's giving our students the opportunity to enroll. And you can see most of them are enrolling in 12 credits or more full-time status, which is great. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then same with this. This is just to get, show everyone again that, again, aid makes a difference for our students in terms of enrollment. We see that on average that if students are receiving some type of state aid, they are enrolled in 12 credits or 11 credits. And then any other aid, which is financial aid, scholarships, again, you can see that their credit load is a lot more higher than a student who's not on aid and may be having to pay out of pocket. So any aid we can help our students is making a difference, and we are seeing them making a commitment to themselves and their education.
Great, thanks, Leslie. So definitely increasing access and helping students take on higher credit loads. And we know the research says, and you've probably heard it in a number of presentations, that students who are full-time are more likely to persist to graduation. So we wanted to also share some student success numbers and how students who have aid compare to students with no aid. So I want you to focus on the yellow and the orange lines. Yellow line is students with no aid, orange line is students receiving any financial aid. And you can see that students who receive any financial aid are significantly more successful than students with no aid because they have those extra funds to help pay for those outside expenses, book supplies, transportation. They don't necessarily have to pick up extra jobs. And in turn, that increases our overall course completion rates. So it was about 2016-17 when we implemented the new strategy with the Wildcat Award, where we were focusing on students who are just outside of that Pell range. And we're happy to see that those numbers keep increasing for course completion, which also, of course, moves to persistence rates and retention rates, and students with any sort of aid outperform students with no aid. So the more that we can impact students by getting even small amounts of aid into a student's hands, we believe that will increase persistence and retention rates. And the numbers show that those students are generally more successful. Which gets us to our graduation rates, which is really the goal of all of us, right? We want our students to get degrees and move on and graduate within the 3-year time period at a community college. And we're happy to see these results. Again, the orange line, students with aid graduating at a significantly higher rate than students without aid, which is continuing to help bring up our institution's overall graduation rate. So we're hoping that our continuing these creative approaches to get aid to students who we generally didn't award before is helping to do this. Additionally, we're hoping that these creative approaches bring down some of our student loan borrowing, because we know even after we're creative as possible, we've gotten all of the federal, state, and institutional aid programs out to students. We've given them work study. Students still have financial need. We saw that a few slides ago, that we're still not meeting all of the need for students, and they can still borrow if they want to. So our goal as a financial aid office or financial aid administrators is to help figure out how to help those students be smart borrowers. We talked about how WNC and TMCC in the first awards, we don't award any student loans. We only award grants, scholarships, and work study programs. At both of our institutions, students have to request a student loan. And that's really intentional, because we want to make sure that students are smart borrowers, that they understand what they're borrowing, they understand how to repay. So we make them go through some steps. So this is just a screenshot from TMCC of some steps that a first-time borrower would take, because students can borrow the same amount to get their certificate, their 30 credit certificate, that they could borrow to get their 4-year bachelor degree. And we want to make sure that students are understanding that this is not an unlimited amount of borrowing that you can do, and you're going to have to pay it back in the end. So we try to do that counseling and that intervention on the front end and help students understand they don't need to borrow the max amount. They can request $200 and borrow $200 if that's all they really need to make to meet their financial need. Anything you want to add on that, Leslie?
Yeah, I think the message we're trying to tell everyone here today too is that, you know, we're not saying that loans are bad, you know, that, you know, loans are there and they're needed for the students, you know, if they need it for their school. But what we want to try to do is we want to arm our students with education, right, on the responsibilities and the consequences, you know, if you take out a student loan. But we also want them to know that if you need to borrow money, you want to take out a student loan versus a private loan. Or, you know, don't use your credit card or go for a payday loan to pay for your college expenses. These are what the loans are for. But providing them with additional education, you know, reminding them that that there are different repayment options, educating them how to contact their loan servicer if they have questions. These are things that are important to remind students that, you know, when they're borrowing, that they need to also think about consciously how much they're going to borrow. And then at the end of the day, that this is money that's going to have to be returned back. So we're just teaching our students that we want them to be responsible borrowers, so that in the future, that if they do need aid as they transfer on to maybe the university, they still have loans that can help them if needed.
So we know a student's going to borrow and they're going to leave us, but when the student borrows, they don't really ever leave us in regards to our cohort default rate or our CDR. So we're going to talk a little bit about what TMCC does once the student leaves to help keep those students out of default.
Thanks, JW. So you're going to see that in this slide and the next slide that, again, our approaches of TMCC and WNC are very similar. You know, we also reach out to our students who have graduated or who may have discontinued their education for several of reasons, but we are in contract with Borrow Connect. But what's their new name now, JW?
Loan Science.
Loan Science, yes. And they help us contact our late stage delinquent borrowers. And then we also do conduct in-house phone calls to our delinquent borrowers at all stages. We also send them emails and letters, but again, it's just to remind them, here are the resources, here's how you can contact your loan servicer, and here are the different ways to repay your student loans. We also have a financial aid professional in our office. She's an NC specialist, and she analyzes our cohort of default students. So what we have seen for the past couple of years, and it has not changed, is that most of the students who are defaulting are first generation freshman students. They have either withdrawn or failed in their first semester. And a lot of these students are Pell eligible students, meaning that they have 0 EFCs. And what we're learning is that very few graduate. So this data really supports the academic research out there, and that there is really a correlation with students defaulting and graduating. So we need to do everything that we can to make sure that we can help our students complete their courses, but also graduate.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, very similar approach. We also are contracted with Loan Science, where they help our students who are delinquent. We're also conducting email campaigns to students who are in their grace periods to help connect them to their servicers. That really hasn't been going on during this COVID year because of people in forbearance and so forth. But once the draft cohort default rates come out as well, we also do an intensive review, and oftentimes we'll find people on the list who are identified as defaulting, but maybe they shouldn't be included in this cohort year, and the data is inaccurate. So our loan coordinator reviews the list of the cohort default rate students thoroughly, and submits any challenges to the Department of Education to make sure that we have an accurate representation of who really should be in our cohort default rate. So those are just some of the things that we're doing on the back end, because like that quote that Leslie read earlier, we're still on the hook for all of these students that borrow even after they leave. And we know that in the community college setting, we're open admissions. So students are kind of sometimes coming and going, and they're not completing their program in maybe a consistent 4-year pattern or 3-year pattern. So trying to keep on top of those students is often a challenge. So that's just to show that our CDR, all of the efforts that we have put into place, on the front end and on the back end, are in goals to keep bringing the CDR down. So we know that we're ready to move on to the Q&A section, but just in conclusion, really the financial aid approaches that we can continue to tweak where we can tweak, like in those access funds to improve access and success for students. And that's really our goal, to help students find funding and leave the community college in a better place than when they came. So we have one final poll. Oops, let me launch the poll. And this is just for fun. And then we'll be ready for some Q&A. Financially, people are mean and don't want to help.
It depends.
Depends on the day, right? Oh man. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So a lot of depends and a lot of myths. And yeah, financial aid is a challenging profession because we have to have a lot of hard conversations. We have to ask some real detailed and personal follow-up questions to make sure that we're completing processes correctly. But really, all in all, financial aid administrators are here to help students and help our colleagues better understand the process. So don't hesitate to reach out to your financial aid folks at your school. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And feel free to put Q&As in the chat, or we don't have a huge group, so if you want to unmute, I'm fine with that also. No burning financial aid questions. It doesn't have to be about this presentation either. I think in the last one, we just had a random financial aid question. So we're happy to take what you have. Okay. So there's a question. Is it correct that you don't offer loans as part of their award notification? If it isn't offered, how do students know they're eligible for loans in that instance that they need it? Great, good, really good question. We didn't cover that. Yeah, we don't offer that as part of their financial aid offer, but in our financial aid offer letter, we do have some instructions or a statement about how students can link out to our loan page, which gives them the steps to follow. If a student isn't offered any of those state or institutional awards or scholarships, and they're not going to get an award letter, they get a separate notice that says they're a loan only student that gives them the instructions on how to request a loan if they choose to. So yeah, thanks for asking that.
Yes, that's correct. Generally, what we do is when we notify students that, we receive their financial aid and their EFC, in the notification, we'll let them know that here are some other options and how you can pay for your college expenses. And that includes loans and also scholarships. And like JW said, we have links to link them to that information.
Hi guys, my name is Shannon Gilliland. I'm from the financial aid office at CSN. I think your presentation was fantastic, so thank you. I do have a question. How do you handle the in-person entrance counseling as far as, is it mandatory for first-time borrowers?
Good question, Shannon. It's not mandatory, but what we have done is we have a financial literacy program here at TMCC, and through this financial literacy program, we have our student employees, our flames. We call them our flame mentors. And they actually are the ones who conduct these workshops for our students. So I think you saw it in our slide that we just let them know, if you want to take out a student loan at TMCC, these are the steps you're going to have to just complete. And then they contact Flames, and then Flames conducts the workshops for these students, and then they can continue to move forward. Actually, even in these workshops, Flames students can help students complete the student loan request form as well, and they help these students submit the loan form for processing.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. All right, any other questions? So there's another question in the chat. If it isn't mandatory, how is your participation rate? So it is mandatory for a student to do entrance counseling, but I think what Leslie's referring to is the in-person workshop is not necessarily mandatory. So students can also do entrance counseling. At WNC, we use the Department of Ed entrance counseling through studentloans.gov. So students have to do some sort of entrance counseling.
You'd actually be surprised. I mean, it's funny because a lot of students, when they hear that they have to contact at first, some are totally okay with it, some, are dreading it, but you'd be surprised. A lot of them actually enjoy the workshop and really find it beneficial in the end. Another thing, what TMCC participated in, and it actually just ended, was we were part of the Federal Experimental Initiative site with offering mandatory entrance counseling workshops, and they have to meet with an academic advisor for our continued student loan borrowers. So in those cases, they were required to participate just because we were participating with the Department of Ed in that program. But that actually ended because, as you guys all know, the feds actually updated their entrance loan counseling. I forget what's the name now. What is it called now, GW?
It's called what's a borrower acknowledgement, and it was supposed to, is that what you're referring? Yeah.
Yeah, ASLA.
Yeah.
So
but there's been some delay on schools having to use that yet, primarily due to COVID. But borrowers have to acknowledge how much they borrowed already, which is something that WNC's already been doing. We make students go onto their National Student Loan Database and review their previous borrowing amount, so they're aware of where they're at before they request their next amount. So the borrower acknowledgement tool is going to help with that, and that will become mandatory, I believe, not for this coming award year, but the following.
Yep.
This is Shannon again. One more question on that, Leslie. So are you guys actually like in the computer labs and you kind of go through the entrance counseling online and you help them with their prom note and all of that during this?
So what we usually do with the loan entrance counseling workshops is we'll give them an overview, kind of an overview of what are their rights, their responsibilities. We'll let them know that they have to complete, it's mandatory to still complete the entrance counseling and master promissory, you know, with the Department of Ed. And then we kind of just give them information, you know, like here's your, this is where you can find information on your servicer. This is how you can contact them. And then during that workshop, in the end, when there's time, that's when students can stay in the lab and they can complete their entrance counseling and also complete their loan request. And then our student employees are there to assist them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
So Leslie, there's a follow-up. Do you have workshop participation rates for the workshop? And what strategies do you use to get students to attend the workshop?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get some of this data from our NSHE specialist coordinator, but what strategies are we using to get students to attend the workshop? So, you know, what we, how we remind students is, I think what students see on our webpage is that it looks like a very complicated step-by-step process. So that alone kind of overwhelms students. But when we talk to students and we tell them, you know, if you attend the entrance counseling workshop, we have people who can help you complete this process. So having that conversation with them and telling them that there's resources here on campus to kind of guide them and help them through the process is actually what we get convincing students to come in and participate in those workshops.
Okay, thanks, Leslie.
All right, well, I think we are at time or a little bit over and want to make sure we give everyone a break. So thank you so much, JW and Leslie, for really just lending your expertise today. We appreciate that. So just a reminder, I've dropped the website in the chat. There is still the keynote session with the president of NASPA starting in about 7 or 8 minutes. So please don't forget to join that. And then we will have their session evaluations and information on the website, and we will get all the recording information to you as well at the conclusion of the summit. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Jessica, for moderating.
Thank you, guys.